And your Old Testament reading this morning comes from the book of Lamentations, beginning in chapter 1, verse 1. Hear now the word of the Lord. How lonely sits the city that once was full of people. How like a widow she has become, she that was great among the nations. She that was a princess among the provinces has become a vassal. She weeps bitterly in the night, with tears on her cheeks, among all her lovers. She has no one to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. Judah has gone into exile with suffering and hard servitude. She lives now among the nations and finds no resting place. Her pursuers have all overtaken her in the midst of her distress. The roads to Zion mourn, for no one comes to the festivals. All her gates are desolate. Her priests groan. Her young girls grieve, and her lot is bitter. Her foes have become her masters. Her enemies prosper, because the Lord has made her suffer. For the multitude of her transgressions, her children have gone away, captives before the foe. From the daughter Zion has departed all her majesty. Her princes have become like stags that find no pasture. They fled without strength before the pursuer. Jerusalem remembers in the days of her affliction and wandering all the precious things that were hers in the days of old, when her people fell into the hand of the foe. And there was no one to help her. The foe looked on, mocking over her downfall. Jerusalem sinned grievously, so she's become a mockery. All who honored her despise her, for they have seen her nakedness. She herself groans and turns her face away. Her uncleanness was in her skirts. She took no thought of her future. Her downfall was appalling, with no one to comfort her. O Lord, look at my affliction, for the enemy has triumphed. Enemies have stretched out their hands over all her precious things. She's seen the nations invade her sanctuary, those who you forbade to enter your congregation. All her people groan as they search for bread. They trade their treasures for food to revive their strength. Look, O Lord, and see how worthless I have become. Is it nothing to you, all who pass by? Look and see if there is any sorrow like my sorrow, which was brought upon me, which the Lord inflicted on the day of his fierce anger. From on high he sent fire. It went deep into my bones. He spread a net for my feet. He turned me back. He's left me stunned, faint all day long. My transgressions were bound into a yoke by his hand. They were fastened together. They weigh on my neck, sapping my strength. The Lord handed me over to those whom I cannot withstand. The Lord's rejected all my warriors in the midst of me. He proclaimed a time against me to crush my young men. The Lord has trodden me as in a winepress, the virgin daughter Judah. For these things I weep. My eyes flow with tears, for a comforter is far from me, one to revive my courage. My children are desolate, for the enemy has prevailed. Zion stretches out her hands, but there's no one to comfort her. The Lord has commanded against Jacob that his neighbors should become his foes. Jerusalem has become a filthy thing among them. The Lord is in the right, for I rebelled against his word. But hear, all you peoples, and behold my suffering. My young women and young men have gone into captivity. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks. You sure? Thanks be to God. All right. I love All Saints Sunday. I love it. It's one of the days I am most thankful that we have a church calendar, because what All Saints Sunday does is it encourages us, it reminds us once a year, independent of what's going on in our lives, external factors. There are certainly external factors in our lives that remind us of this, but All Saints Sunday reminds us, regardless of those, to spend some time thinking about the not fun stuff, thinking about the hard stuff, remembering death, the people we know who've died, and the fact that that reminds us that we're going to die. It's been a tradition for a long time, long before Christ, that humans around this time of year follow a rhythm of ritual and remembrance that leads us, as fall changes to winter, and the leaves change and the flowers die, and the air gets cold, to remember what we've lost, and what we're sad about, and what we're afraid of. That's really what Halloween is. There's this talk about it being of pagan origin, and I mean, it's true that there were pagan celebrations around this time of year, but Halloween is All Hallows Eve. The tradition, All Hallows was yesterday, All Saints. This is All Saints Sunday. It's the nearest Sunday to All Saints Day. And traditionally on All Saints Day, we remember those who have died who are going to heaven. The day before it, traditionally, we would remember everybody else. All Hallows Eve, on All Souls Day. And it's spooky, and it's uncomfortable, and it causes us to respond in these ways. But when you see the cobwebs stretched out across the Target counter, you can remember that that's really what's going on. That it's a liturgical rhythm that Target is participating in, that Dunkin' Donuts makes orange spider donuts for. It's because this is the right time for us to remember sadness, fear, death. And it's important that we do that. We need to do that. We need something to encourage us to do that. It's something that the Hebrews did. It's something that God instituted, required them to do, to follow a yearly rhythm of feasts and holidays and sufferings and remembering what we might prefer to forget, what might be easier to push to the back of our brains and try not to think about. And it served the Hebrews well that they had this tradition, because as a rule, as a culture, they do a better job at mourning than we do. At suffering, at being honest about their pain. And it's evident in our readings today that they're also pretty good at being honest about it in literature, in art, in poetry, exploring the depths of those feelings. What a beautiful thing to do when you feel sad, when you feel angry, when you feel lost, is to make art out of it. Hebrew poets don't hesitate to say things like, "I'm suffering, and I blame God." That kind of stuff is in the Bible. It's common in Revelation. It's the whole book of Lamentations. And it's all through the Psalms. These people who are just saying, nothing is good. Food's lost its taste. I feel like I'm crying and filling up bowls of tears, and then, God, you're making me drink them. And that honesty and that tradition of honesty leads to a boldness. And it's a boldness that they continue to have. Our cousins in the faith, the modern Jews, still have a very rich tradition about mourning and grieving and loss. But we Americans, as a rule, not every American, but as a rule, we're good at something else. If you could put the American culture, and compare it to other global cultures, we're really good at something called denial and deflection and looking at the bright side. And it helps us to be more productive workers sooner, get back on the horse. And what we consume, among other things, is a whole lot of pills, a whole lot of therapy, because of the stuff that we've stuffed. And we start to consume a whole lot of guilt, because we start to feel guilty that other people might be able to tell that we might have some feelings. So we take that upon ourselves and we blame us. I want to be very clear that therapy is a good thing. Taking medication that's prescribed by your doctor is a good thing. But I hope that as we gather for All Saints Sunday, this can be a kind of therapy for us as well. That when we are together as the family of God, it can be part of the work that we do to build into our DNA every day of our lives, every season of our lives, in understanding that hurt and pain and suffering and death and loss and fear are a part of it. And that it's okay and that we don't like it. And it's okay not to like it. And our responses to these things are responses that we can have with God. They're not responses that separate us from God or from others. Responses that we can have with other people. So as we talk about the honesty and the bluntness of the Bible, as we read scriptures like that in Lamentations, my prayer for you is that it would help you to be blunt about what you're feeling. As we listen to songs that remind us of all the saints, as performed beautifully on handbells, and as we call out names, my prayer for you is that it would invite you and welcome you to feel the feelings that you maybe haven't dedicated time to feel. I pray that it would help you to be vulnerable about your suffering here with us or with others that you love. That you would know that you're not burdening people by choosing to be vulnerable, because when you be vulnerable, it helps other people to do it. And we all need that. There's a tradition that you might be familiar with. Whenever somebody in the Bible experiences loss, when someone dies, they rend their garments. You've seen this before? Do you know the reason for it? It's not, it seems like an intuitive thing. To rend your garments, to tear your clothes. It seems like, oh yeah, because you're just mad and you're going to break something. And I've always understood that part of it. But the real purpose for it is to show the heart. You rend your garment far enough to expose the heart. Because I'm in mourning and I want you to be able to see my heart that's aching. I want it to be exposed to you. I want everyone to know I'm choosing to be vulnerable. That's why I rend my garment. And I hope that you do the same. Whether you literally tear a piece of cloth or not, I hope that you choose to expose your heart at the times when you're feeling bad. So that the world, so that God can see and can care. That's what we're called to do when we're afflicted. In the funeral, in American and Western European tradition, there's always a speech. Do you know what the speech at the funeral is called? It's the eulogy. We give a eulogy at a funeral in our tradition. And eulogy, it comes from the Greek. It means good word. Eu and logos, so to give a good word. That means that no matter who it was, no matter who died, someone's going to stand up and they're going to say something good about them. They're going to talk about everything good that they remember, everything they can say about what an incredible person they were, and how everybody loved them and they loved everybody, and that we remember them fondly. You don't speak ill of the dead. It's a superstition. Something bad will happen. I don't know what the original superstition was. Maybe they'd haunt you or something, but you're not allowed to say something bad when someone has died in our culture. In Hebrew, the speech you give is called a chesped. And that's different. That comes from a word that means truth. You just get it out there. You could gather around the coffin, and you can remember the good things. I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying, man, her cooking was out of sight, right? But there's also nothing wrong with saying, man, he told the corniest jokes. Not gonna miss those. Or, Stan was a good guy, but he drank too much. Yeah, he did. Killed him. God does this incredible thing when you put stuff out there. God begins to work when the sunlight hits what we're feeling. All of a sudden, when we do that, He turns the mourning into dancing. There's got to be mourning. He doesn't allow you to dance by hiding the mourning, but when the mourning shows up, God starts to transform us, and He leads us into leadership. That through suffering, we actually, again, in the Jewish tradition, those were some of the richest times to study the Talmud. You would come out of a period of mourning, and a period of mourning could take like 6 months, and you would give your insights back to the community about who God is from that place. And it's not just the Hebrew people. I know that I seem like I am kind of a Hebrew geek. I mean, I love that cultural tradition, but many cultures have this. I'm Irish, and there's a brilliant Irish tradition called keening. Have you heard of keening? We have professional mourners come in. This is old Irish. You got to go back to the old country. I have a video about keening, actually. I'd like to show it, just this demonstration of this mourning tradition. Let's watch this video together.
You've had a terrible day.
Yes, I have.
Are you sure you don't want to keen?
I don't know, and perhaps some other time. I just
Please,
don't know.
please. There's no time right now to try.
But I just don't know if I could.
Oh, yes, you can. Now, come on. It's a
well,
wonderful, wonderful sound.
I've never heard it.
It's kind of like, a little bit like this. It's like,
It's all right. He's keening.
Too loud.
No, well, it was a little startling. I don't know if I could. I've just never done anything like that. Let it out like that.
Yeah, you have to let it out.
Will you help me?
I will. I'll try now. Just do it soft at first. Easy, start.
That feels so good! Oh, Sam! I really mean it. Thank you, Marcus.
You have a nice day.
Ciao.
I apologize for the brightness of that video. We probably need to think about doing something for the light coming into these windows when we share videos. But that's keening. That's what Halloween is about. That's what it's supposed to be for. It's what All Saints' Day is about. We remember it, and we feel it. And because we feel bad, we feel better. You know, that was Robin Williams in that sketch. Robin Williams. He died by suicide. He was the clown that made everybody laugh. And he was dealing with a darkness inside him that we never got to see. And it overtook him. And he took his own life. I really miss him. And I think that it makes that sketch so much more powerful now, so much more potent to remember. There are 150 people on average every year just in Orange County who take their lives by suicide. Every year. That number's more like 3,500 in the state of Florida. I look around at my friends, and I can count off 3 or 4 that tell me that they have suicidal thoughts regularly. But I look to the Bible, and I honestly believe that if they could find a way, if they could find a place, if they could find safety enough to get it out, to be honest about it and to not be judged for being honest about it, to expose their heart, to say to God, I'm mad at you, God, that you're hurting me. That if they could find that place, they'd feel better. And I'm thankful that we've taken a step towards being that kind of place, that we've been that kind of place for people before and for each other. That's one of the duties of the church, to guide people through their mourning. That we've become a community to bring healing to a world that desperately needs healing. And so, I want to ask you to take one more risk with me, one more change, one more deviation from what we usually or normally do. And I want to ask you to rise from your seats and come on forward for communion. What we're going to do is we're going to form a big circle, and we're going to join hands together around the table. Because all of the saints are gathered around this table symbolically, and I want us all to be gathered physically in space. Amen. May you know that wherever you go, you are never alone. You are never abandoned. You're never forgotten, and you are always blessed. Amen.